we've got close to 70% of fourth graders not reading proficiently. So not only are we not serving maybe kids with learning disabilities, but we are creating generations of kids who really should be able to read, but we weren't doing the instruction correctly. We weren't following the science of reading.
All right, welcome everyone to the Literacy Keys, and I am really excited. I am here today with Faye Casell, and we have a lot to share with you. So what I'm going to do is, Faye is an ALTA, near and dear to our heart, therapist. And so I'm going to let her introduce herself because she'll do a much better job at it than anything that I could attempt. So Faye, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. So yes, I am a certified academic language therapist, ACOUT, through ALTA. In the state of Texas, I'm also what's called a licensed dyslexia therapist. I am a certified special educator, general ed teacher, although I never worked in general ed. It was always special ed. And I've been working with kids with a variety of disabilities and differences for over 20 years. So that's me in a nutshell. I am not working in a school right now. I am supporting kids and parents. I'm doing private dyslexia therapy. And then I've also got some support and offerings through homereadingcoach.com, which is kind of an online program that I'm launching next week.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah.
And what we'll do is we will put a link in the show notes to that. But I think, you know what, let's first talk about ALTA and kind of what it means to be certified, because I'm also ALTA certified. And I'll be honest, when I first got into this, I didn't realize what a difference there is between the different types of certification and
There
the
really is.
requirements. I'm like,
There really
oh
is.
my goodness.
I'll send it to you later, but somebody from, I'm going to get her organization wrong. I want to say it's like Dyslexia Waco or something. She did this really nice infographic that really lays out the certifications. And then I wrote, and it's free, but an ebook, the Dyslexia Roadmap for Families, where I also lay out who the certifying organizations are, because it is so confusing. So ALTA is the Academic Language Therapy Association of America, and it certifies people who are called CALPs, Certified Academic Language Therapists, or CALP, Certified Academic Language Practitioners. And they keep upping their standards. So currently, in order to become a CALP, you have to have a master's degree and an associated discipline. The coursework probably takes about 2.5 years or so. There's 700 supervised hours. You have to do 10, I think, recorded lessons. Lots of continuing education, really just covering sort of everything: brain science, reading, fluency, writing. It's a very intensive program. There are different certifying organizations. So I, for example, studied with the NIHouse Learning Center in Houston, and that's how I initially got certified. Now I'm in South Texas, where a lot of the CALPs started out through the Scottish Rite program, their Take Flight program, and I did go back and get training in that, and Reading by Design, which is also used a lot here in Texas. So there are different kind of organizations that they might get certified through, but we all have to meet that high standard and then pass tests. National tests. So it is quite an undertaking.
Right. I joke that, doing 700 hours and all of the recorded videos and everything just gives you the honor of sitting for the test. You still need to
Yeah.
pass the
Yeah,
test.
exactly. Exactly.
And
And do a case study and do, yeah, it's a lot.
mm,
But it's worth it. I mean, I come from the other side, which is I'm wrapping my head around and trying to understand what an OG tutor is. And when they say there are different levels of associates in this, and you know, it, it's we're all in the same world, but we've got some different flavorings. So,
absolutely. So I
yeah,
encourage parents, just do your homework, make sure that the person that you're engaging kind of knows their stuff. And then the other thing is, it's going to come down to personalities because
mhm,
that relationship between the therapist, the tutor, and the child, the student, is essential. And there isn't one size fits all. Some people do really well with younger children. I know that
mhm.
I tend to like the teenagers. They get my sarcasm. The little kids are like, huh? They don't
Yeah.
quite get me for that.
Yeah, so my master's degree is in early childhood special ed. So there was a period of time when they turned 8. I was like, "What do I do with you?" Now I work with kids through middle school, and it's been wonderful to sort of grow my career through their development too. But no, I hear you. And when I start working with families, I always do a free initial consult where I kind of do some probing to get a sense of
Yeah.
where the child is and how we're going to begin. But then I also am very upfront and say I would like to do a 6-week period where we get into the flow of things and then we check in and just make sure that you feel like this is
Yeah.
working and I feel like this is working. And there are kids and families where it's not the right fit. And so
Yeah.
I just help them find somebody else. But you're right. You're in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
Um, with dyslexia therapy, it really is uh, a rewiring of the brain. I mean, the
Yeah.
scientist will take imaging kind of from before the therapy, and after, and we're really laying down new neural pathways. It's an intensive process, and you have to feel good about the person you're, doing that with.
Right, absolutely. You're working with them and everything else. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and let's talk about dyslexia and your personal journey. Because what I have discovered is that many of us, it's a personal journey. So I'm always curious and I love kind of delving into that because part of, for our listeners, I want parents to understand really they're not alone and that they may feel that what they're going through right now is so overwhelming, but many of us have been through similar. It's never the same, but similar situations. So, what's your story or how you got involved in dyslexia?
Sure, sure. So I will say I am an an IEP, and
Mhm.
504 mom. So I am in the trenches with the parents too.
Yep.
I'm on both sides. So when my son was born, like I said, I come from an early childhood special ed background. And when my son was born, by age 1, I noticed a lot of developmental delays. In fact, the thing that really clued me in, we were on this 4-hour train trip in Durango. They've got this scenic train route. And at the end of it, all the people in my car got off and were like, "Oh, he's such a good baby. He's such a good baby. What a good baby." Because we'd been in there for 4 hours. And I turned kind of terrified to my husband and I said, "The only reason people call a baby a good baby is if they're quiet." And I realized he hadn't been babbling, he hadn't been talking, he hadn't been doing any of that. So poor little guy, I had him in speech therapy for like 14 months. Um, And then there was a lot of motor delays. I remember the first time that he tried to clap his hands, he was looking at them and trying to bring them together. He was well after a year old. And so there were just so many motor and language
Yeah.
delays. So I had told my husband, we're going to need to be like, there's going to be dyslexia, or there's going to be some sort of issue
Yeah.
with his reading. I'm not sure what it is. And at that point, I had been working with really young kids, not necessarily so doing all the kind of phonological awareness and all those pre-literacy sort of skills, but not really delving into the decoding. And so I had already had it in the back of my mind that I was going to study dyslexia therapy and kind of ramp myself up because I didn't know what was coming, but I felt like something was there.
Yeah.
Um, and sure enough, his kindergarten year, it was not clicking. And uh, so I launched him. I launched his reading. And at that point, I really didn't know what I was doing. Looking back, I'm like, oh God, thank God that worked because I really didn't know what I was
I
doing.
know. We experiment on our kids. It's like, oops, oh well.
Yeah, yeah. And then during that summer between kinder and first was when I started studying dyslexia therapy. And then, so I really kind of got him launched. It did come together without a lot more intensive work for me. It turns out that he has really significant ADHD,
Okay.
um, which I don't know, there's a lot of overlap of kids with dyslexia and ADHD. And even for kids who maybe don't have sort of a classical dyslexia, ADHD can really mimic it, I found,
Mm,
in the early, but we were able to do medication and those sorts of things and I was still doing all the OT and all the other therapies. So he did ultimately take off without much more ongoing support. I would say there was a intensive few months where I was really in
right.
there working with him. Um, and so, yeah, that brought me into the world of dyslexia therapy. And then I moved into a resource teaching position. So, working K
Okay.
through 5 with kids with a variety of learning disabilities. Many of them had dyslexia and other co occurring things. So, then I was just fully immersed and started my private practice in addition to working in public schools. So now I am all reading all the time.
Okay. All right. Very interesting. And I find that so often with many people, that's exactly what it is. It hits very close to home. And then we want to know everything there is about dyslexia because we realize we don't know anything. And so, if as a parent, we can't be the advocate, if we don't understand it, how can we help our children? And so that a lot of times I found becomes the motivation
It is a
behind.
big motivator.
Yeah.
I will say that my daughter actually has a more significant disability. And it is not in my wheelhouse. So that is where I'm very much aligned with a parent dealing with a dyslexia diagnosis, as I have been dealing with trying to figure out how to advocate and support for her, for something that I feel like I should know something, right? And I don't, and I really don't. So yeah, it's overwhelming. You do dive in, you want to learn everything. You feel like you have to become an advocate, a teacher, and everything overnight. Um, and for me, the part that makes me crazy is that I feel like parents have to reinvent the wheel every time. It's as if each family has discovered that there's this thing called dyslexia. I feel like there's not a really good infrastructure for supporting families. So, one of the reasons that I started my home reading coach and then I made this, roadmap for families is because I'm in these Facebook groups, I'm on these boards, and it's the same story
Yeah.
over and over and over again. The
Yeah.
school says they can't diagnose. The school says she's too smart to have dyslexia. The school says that, they passed this beginning of the year exam. The school says that what's another one that there are a couple that they just are always saying, we don't test until third grade, we don't do this, we don't do this, and it just makes me bonkers. So I'm like, the school's wrong. Here's some information, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. And then the fact that IDEA is, a federal law, but states are implementing, and within that, districts are implementing with some variants, is very confusing for families. It makes me
Right.
psychotic.
All right. So there's a lot to unravel there, kind of the onion. There's a lot to
Hmm.
unpeel for that. I think that one of the things, let's start with the schools. Let's start with the schools because, on the one hand, let's face it, most schools are underfunded when it comes to the needs of special education services and everything else, right? So,
I would
um,
even back it up a step further
okay.
and say that. So, when I was in graduate school, I was at Columbia University. I did an internship with a reading and writing project there. This is, 20 something years ago. And I came home and I told my husband, they are doing the weirdest things. They go into the classroom and they cover up the word that they want the kids to read in a sentence, and they tell them to look at the picture and guess what they think the word's going to be. And then they reveal, the first letter and tell them to guess. I was like, that doesn't seem right. But they're the experts, and thousands of teachers are coming each summer to study with them. So what do I know? And that was one of the reasons that when I wanted to move up and also support my son, I was like, I don't know what that mumbo jumbo was in graduate school. So I'm going to go here and get like training from dyslexia folks. And sure enough, that mumbo jumbo is
Yeah.
3Qing. And so, to back it up and say, as a nation, America has failed reading instruction. We've got close to 70% of fourth graders not reading proficiently. So not only are we not serving maybe kids with learning disabilities, but we are creating
Yeah.
generations of kids who really should be able to read. But we weren't doing the instruction correctly. We weren't following the science of reading. So it's kind of a double whammy.
Right, absolutely. And I think that the institutions that certify, that create the teachers and everything else, they're not teaching the teachers how to teach reading to kids. I had heard something like they get 6 hours worth of instruction in the program now. So how in the world can someone come out of that, even if it's double or triple that, 18 hours, wow, in a master's program? How in the world are you then going to go into the classroom and then teach children how to read? And so, to your point,
Yeah, it really is. And I've got this on my website, but it really is a lottery. It's a teacher lottery.
Mhm.
You are gambling with your child's education all the time, because depending on where the teacher went to school, who he did his student teaching with, what curriculum and training the district utilizes to adopt. In my experience, my master's in education was very much about theory and pedagogy, and then they really relied on the school to teach the practical I was very fortunate that I was doing my student teaching under some phenomenal teachers in New York City, but
Right.
not everybody has that, right? And so it's just super uneven. There are some rock star educators out there who are doing phenomenal work despite maybe what their district has adopted or what is the norm. And then there are these pockets of schools that are just knocking it out of the park, but you really don't know. And it's not confined to economics. So,
Correct.
of those 70% of kids who are not proficient, 30% of them have parents who went to college. These are
Mhm.
not undereducated, uneducated families. So,
Right.
they're
But I think
trusting.
that that is exactly the point that I wanted to just make, because schools are the experts. Teachers get a master's in order to know what to do. But when you don't know what you don't know is one of my favorite expressions, right? So if the teachers are coming out and the newer teachers, they're not familiar with it, they don't really, they're not aware of it. And then you have a situation where either the districts or most administrators were teachers, they're just kind of going up and everything else. Then you have the FOMO, fear of missing out, whereby everyone is jumping in on the latest educational bandwagon. And we had 20 years of 3Qing that we are now trying, it's like spaghetti, and we're trying to unravel it,
Mhm.
one strand at a time. And that's
Yes.
that's the general education. So
Right.
now when we take and talk about special education, whether we're talking about a 504, if we're talking about an IEP, that the student needs even more intensive instruction,
Right.
and so forth, then can you share any stories that, like, for example, you mentioned the one where parents are told, oh, we can't do any testing before the third grade, which is hogwash. But
Mhm.
parents don't realize that that is incorrect. And as long as the parent puts it in writing, copies to the principal, the special education, et cetera, then under IDEA, the school has to evaluate.
The
But most
school
parents,
the school has to either get your consent and begin testing,
Mhm.
or they have to issue prior written notice, full, laying
Yep.
out right there in black and white why they are declining to test. And you walk in putting it in writing, and you need to walk out of there putting it in writing.
Yeah.
And yeah, parents are very trusting. So I mean, I've got a bazillion stories. Now I will say I have been privileged to work at schools where um they were not the norm, but that's
Mhm.
partially because I am not the norm. When I went and I interviewed, I would interview the school. I would lay
Yeah.
out for them. I am going to advocate for kids. I am going, so I really made sure that we were on the same wavelength. In fact, when I came here, I had a principal in an interview kind of raise her voice at me and say, I'm the one doing the interview here, not you. And I said, I think we're done. you know?
Right. It's not a good fit.
We're good. So I will say I have been very fortunate, but the families that I work with, so this one mother here, she had started calling me because she was in this long fight with the school. And at the end of it, she was really excited. Her kids started getting services. Now, mind you, she began the fight in first grade where they were refusing to test, refusing to test. She did an IEE. It said he was dyslexic. They refused to accept it. I mean, and she did everything right, like as far as accessing resources. And so he began getting services in third grade. And I asked her, she was the sole provider of her family. I asked her, how many hours do you think you spent fighting for
Mhm.
his services? And she said, upwards of 200 hours. And my heart just dropped because that's in the ballpark of the amount of intervention I do with kids.
Yeah.
So I was like, if she had spent 2 years getting his brain rewired during that, and I don't mean that in like a way to fault her, but so part of what I'm doing is I'm now teaching parents how to step in and showing them how to do it if they're going to fight or do whatever they're going to do with the school, just so we can get started and take
Yeah.
advantage of that malleable brain, because that time is precious when they're that young. I have a family member who asked me to work with her kiddo. And so I did. And I said, I don't diagnose, but I have seen enough to feel that confident that you need to get on this and get her assessed. The school said, oh, but she passed this beginning of the year assessment. And so I asked them which assessment it was. I verified with a friend of mine who is an administrator in a school I worked in. And I said to her, on this particular assessment for first grade, I know the test reads the questions and answers to them, but does it read the reading passage to them? And she said, it does read one reading passage and the other one it doesn't. And I said, okay. So I went back and I said, this is not a test for dyslexia. And in fact, it read the passage to her. And this girl is so bright, this little girl that I'm working with, so her parents would show me her spelling test. She got 100. It was on the diphthong oi. She knew that every answer was going to be OI or OY. So it was a 50-50 shot. So then, because they had the image, which is age appropriate to have an image on a reading test, and then written two ways. And the way that it was written had the OI at the end of the word, and that looks wrong,
Yeah.
So then I asked her, because they also were studying ow. So I asked her to spell cow for me. And she wrote CO, and then she turned to me and she said, I know it's either a U or a W. And I said, it is. And she was like, but which one is it? And I said, well, that's the point of this activity, is to see, do you know which one it is? And so she guessed you. And I told her, and she's not going to make the mistake again, because I told her, I said, oh, I'm going to tell you something about this sound. When it comes at the end of the word, it's spelled W. So now she's never going to mess it up again.
Yeah.
So that's an example of a kid being really bright and a test or a classroom activity not picking up on it. What you need for this kid, and what she is ultimately getting, is an assessment to pick up on the signs of dyslexia. And that's not the same as classroom work. So I do find a lot of parents come back and they're like, oh, but they said she passed this thing, or that her grades are okay. And I said, well, 20% of the grade is going to have dyslexia. Are 20% of the grade failing right now? Because it can be really hard to fail kindergarten and first grade and even second grade. So
Right.
why are we using that as a barometer of whether or not the kid has dyslexia or needs testing? It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't make sense. And unfortunately, like you said, each parent seems to be reinventing the wheel. Part of the reason that I started this podcast was like, look, I did everything wrong, learn from my experience, and let's get information out there to provide hope for parents, because there are a lot of us that have walked the path. We have a
Right.
journey, learn from us. So now tell me a
I
little bit
Mhm.
about the resource that you have for parents.
Sure. So I'm sort of twofold. One is I just want families to have access to good resources and information sources. So I did write a free ebook. It's called The Parents Roadmap to Dyslexia, or for Dyslexia.
Mhm.
And it just honestly, I took all those frequently asked questions that come up, or the conversations that I have every time I first speak to a parent, and I put it into sort of a book form. So we talk about asking for testing, and how to do that, what the test looks like, accommodations, parent advocacy, how to sort of deal with pushback from the school, who are the different professionals that can work with your child and what are sort of their levels. Here are questions you can be asking, here's how to think about the transition to middle school. You just the social emotional piece, because honestly, that is the part that families, in my experience, are most concerned about is
Yeah.
they recognize they've hit a point where their child is now refusing to go to school, anxious to go to school, feels like they're dumb, saying, I'm stupid. I will never get it. And so that these families feel like I've lost my happy kid. So I really just sort of, it's really just a way, I think, to then funnel them on to really good resources. So, sending them to Decoding Dyslexia, parent organizations, IDA, like just different sort of places to go, understood.org, just where are
Mhm.
some good vetted resources so that you can start asking the questions. So that's kind of the first thing that I've done. The second thing that I have is homereadingcoach.com. And so I am launching next week a reading breakthrough e-course, and it is designed to train parents to start dyslexia intervention. So I have created all the reading decks, all the spelling decks. I got designers, I wrote decodable texts, I did reading practices, and I am walking them through hand in hand. Now, I know that it would be a lot easier to turn on a video of somebody else doing it, but like the example of the little girl I mentioned before, you need a human sitting there and not saying, did she get it right, did she get it wrong, but like, she got it right, but should she get it right because she knows it or because she had some good guesswork, that sort of thing. So it's a video course. I teach the families. I've written out 53 sessions of dyslexia intervention, 13 weeks, just to get them through that foundational legwork. And then I'll build it from there. But this is the beta launch, so I can tweak it. Because like I said, almost every family that I talk to, they've been in this waiting game, or their grades are too good until third grade. That's when their grades aren't good enough anymore. So I want the kids to start getting services right away, and I want the parents to be empowered. So I think it's a good way to get them going. It's not the solution for every family, but
Yeah.
for some families, it's a really good, viable solution. And it's $97. I mean, and right now I'm discounting it from there for the beta launch. So it's a really affordable way. Whereas, a session with me in Texas is $80, but if I lived in New York, it'd probably be closer to 200 or beyond. So it's a really cost effective, kind of low risk way to just get the ball rolling. And we cover everything. We do reading, we do spelling, do some writing, do some grammar, do some fluency. So just really a chance also for parents to kind of understand what they're going to be looking for
Yeah.
should they choose to pick somebody privately, should they get school resources at that point. They kind of have a background now of knowing what to expect.
And what are the different elements of a program? Is it systematic? Is it cumulative? Is it explicit? All of the buzzwords that honestly, as a parent, you're like, okay, I understand the words, I get it, but you don't see how it fits together. Like, to your
Mhm.
point, OW, when you have that diphthong, well, at the end of the word, it's OW, it's not OU. And
Right.
knowing those instances, those are rules that unfortunately a lot of times children are not taught. They're expected to infer But with the dyslexic child, you can't. You have to teach them so that they know to recognize it. And I think that that is
Right.
essential. So I
Right.
thank you for creating that, because I am sure that it is a resource that many parents can take advantage of. And it's a great way to start for
It
that.
is. I mean, and even if what should happen when you sign consent and there is suspicion of a learning disability is the school
Mhm.
should start intervention services of some sort. But, those timelines are, they've got a certain amount of time to test, they've got a certain amount of time to write the report, they've got a certain amount of time, to hold the IEP meeting. In Texas, we call it an ARD. So I must call it an ARD. Outside of Texas, they're like, what's an ARD? I'm like, our state just always has to be different. So, but yeah, so it is at least a way to just get the ball rolling. The other thing I find, and that's been really interesting for me personally, is given that my background is special education, multisensory instruction is second nature
Mm.
to me. I find that a lot of people who enter dyslexia therapy from kind of a general education standpoint, it's just a different ball game for them. So I also really think that the multisensory piece of my program and showing parents the different ways to do things is I'm really excited about that because I feel like there needs to be more of that in dyslexia. And to me, it is one of the really special ways that
Yeah.
instruction is different because it's sort of bringing the information in through new pathways that the brain can kind of. I think of it as those velcro targets that you throw the little ping
Right.
pong balls at. I feel like the multisensory instruction is kind of what helps it stick. Here's the information and then this helps it stick. And so I think that it's tools that when parents learn that, they can then just keep applying it forward in homework help as you're getting older and that sort of stuff.
Absolutely. And a lot of times, one of the things that I will share with teenagers, if you're trying to learn something, walk around the room and say it out loud. And they look at me like, I need to be at my desk. I'm like, no, you don't. Being seated is the worst thing for you. I want you up. I want you marching around the room with hand movements and whatever it is. And I want you saying it out loud. And then afterwards, they come back and you go, that kind of worked. Yeah.
So my undergraduate degree and my first passion was theater. And that was always the thing that people would say when they would come see shows. They're like, how did you memorize all that dialogue? And it really is. It's when it's attached to movement, when it's said out loud, it just starts to come in, it comes in a lot easier and faster.
Right, for
Yeah.
that is wonderful. Any last minute words, advice for parents, or anything else? Like I said, I will include in the show notes links to the resources so that our listeners can check it out. But like any advice that you would have to.
Yeah, I do. First of all, if you're in a situation where your kid is in third, fourth grade and you've trusted this school, don't kick yourself. Everybody does it, right? And if you're in a situation where you're one of the lucky ones and they really knew what they were doing and took you by the hand, congratulations. Don't gloat too much. But what I would say to families is what somebody told me when I was having my first baby. She said, when you go to the hospital and they tell you that they have to do a C-section, they have to do this, they have to do this, or you can't have this, or you can't have this. She said, I want you to envision them as walking around with a plate of hors d'oeuvres and you get to think about, am I going to select that? Am I going to ask them a question about the ingredients? And I feel like with parents, even when you don't know what as much as you would like to know about your child's learning disability, to envision the school as passing some hors d'oeuvres at a very nice cocktail party. And they don't get to tell you, you have to eat this or you cannot eat this. You get to ask questions and decide, think about it. And just even that moment of pause is so important. You can always table an IEP conversation, a 504 conversation, and say, I'm not ready to make a decision. I need this time, to go back and then determine, do you need to have somebody come with you, that sort of thing. So I think that is my piece of advice is don't be afraid to tap the brakes a little, to kind of decide that you're going to be a little more discerning and maybe not take that first offer. That you're going to need to come back with more information. That is your right.
Absolutely. And you know what? That is excellent advice for many parents for that. So I greatly appreciate it. Well, that's it. I think this is another wrap for the Literacy Keys. Thank you very, very much for coming on and for sharing your experiences, your knowledge, and everything else, and for creating the program that parents can check it out. So, with that, I would like to say goodbye to you and goodbye to all the listeners for that.
Goodbye. Thanks.